This week, we also heard some reports asking the question about what real threat TikTok actually does pose to users in the first place. This comes at the start of the year, as TikTok did have a roundabout of 12-hour ban that took hold in the US. We've discussed and we've done some videos talking in a lot more depth about the threat or the alleged threat. I'll leave those linked in the description down below for those who are interested. But, quote, within the Social Media Today report that we are using as part of our research for this story, we heard, quote, what seems to be likely a broader scale, however, is the Chinese state operating and may use TikTok to seed pro-China messages and influence voters from other nations to support certain moves or benefits for the CCP. Quote, in 2022, for example, Google disrupted over 50,000 instances of a Chinese influencer program called Dragon Bridge across YouTube, bloggers, and AdSense, whilst Meta also detected many instances of Chinese influence operation within the company, removing almost 5,000 Facebook profiles linked to one such a program in just one quarter in 23. Most recently, Microsoft warned that it found various Chinese-based groups seeking influence over voters in other nations, including the US, through correspondence through social media activity. It then goes on to share some information that was found from a peer research study that found that, quote, according to studies conducted by Peer, more than half of TikTok users, 52%, say that they regularly get news from the site or the app. Quote, among US adults who say that they recently get news on TikTok and just say that they get their news on sites from influencers or celebrities is 68%, and from other news outlets like journalists being 67%, and even higher percentage being 84% get their news from other people who don't personally know, or who are not who are potentially influenced, who they don't know personally, who are not influencers or celebs or news outlets or journalists, advocates, or for non-profits. Security officers remain tight-lipped on what the threat exactly is for TikTok. TikTok poses. Based on evidence from other apps, there is increasing reliance on TikTok's news content, and I would imagine it's more about that kind of sector. And this kind of does bring up the question around, is it one of those things where the Western ideology is trying to protect its values and its ideology and its spin on the news by wanting to control the news sources, right? For some people on the internet and some people who maybe consume content regularly, they would be in a position, or they would be aware that there is going to be certain skews, whether this is political, whether this is slightly more sympathetic related to a certain regime, for example. And some people are really, really pro mainstream media. Other people are very against it. So in that respect, you're going to have this kind of broken opinion. And I think what the threat could be, or what the threat's been alluded to with some of this research coming out now, is that China may be able to leverage the fact that maybe people who aren't as qualified, aren't from mainstream, aren't from more credible sources, aren't going to be able to fact check or check for misinformation or check for disparities or check for further context on these stories that they do cover. And I guess it does bring back that question of, again, whose responsibility is it to ensure that the content or the information that's being articulated, and we're seeing this in a world where, there's being some laws discussed at the moment related to misinformation, and, potentially seeing how social media platforms can be held responsible for it, or the posters can be held responsible for it, or the governments of the countries can be held responsible for it. So there's lots of conversations around it at the moment. And I think it's one of those things where people, in my view at least, need to be aware and need to be quite skeptical of everything they hear, and be able to and be willing to further their research, further their knowledge, and take source and take understanding from those other sides of the argument, right? Because if you don't understand fully the two sides of the argument, then you're going to have a level of bias, right? Now, does this mean that necessarily TikTok is being leveraged by the CCP to maybe a road array or a road or maybe seem as if that, you know, their agenda is being pushed harder than others, perhaps. But I think it's one of those things where it's kind of up to the person consuming the content to firstly consume where their source is, but also number two, make sure, as I said, to fact check and look for further context, look for further information in that respect as well, to make sure that they're not just getting one side and they're not just getting that level of biasy in that respect as well. But that's just what I think. I'd love to hear what you think in the comment section down below. Do you think TikTok is a big threat and it should be banned? We will know more as it's just a matter of weeks away, you know, at the start of April, those 75 days that Trump did grant TikTok to find a US buyer will be over. So if we don't hear anything, then it's likely to be banned again and back on the banning block again. But that is all we know at the moment, and I'd love to hear what you think in the comment section down below. Again, there's quite a lot of bidders in the research I've been doing related to like who's potentially going to bid it, but nothing has been confirmed in regards to who's buying TikTok at the moment. So as and when we find out more, I'll be sure to let you know. But do let me know in the comment section down below. Do you think TikTok or these other social media giants are the threat that some people claim that they are, or is actually more information better overall?